Some losses arrive not through death, but through the hands of those you called family. Judith Mercer had poured decades into building a home, raising children, believing she would age inside that quiet safety. But within weeks of her husband's illness, everything she held began sliding away. The property, the authority, even her seat at her own table. All that remained was a scrap of land her father once owned, a place she had always assumed was worthless, a workshop she had never once been permitted to enter as a child. No one understood that yet. The forgotten place was the one holding everything that mattered. Not merely land, but the answer to a lifetime of silence. It started on a morning that carried no warning. Walter Mercer collapsed from a stroke on a Thursday at the end of September. Right there in the aisle between paint cans and power tools, in the building supply store where he had stood for 30 years. A delivery worker, barely 2 weeks on the job, found him on the floor. The boy sprinted to the parking lot to reach Daniel. Judith got the call while sorting old books in the reading room of the high school where she had retired less than a year before. The doctor said Walter was fortunate. The stroke spared his life. It did not fully steal his speech or his ability to walk. But it stole the thing that had always kept this family moving in its familiar groove. The presence of a man everyone waited for before making a single decision. After that moment, shifts came slowly. Daniel began showing up at the hospital more frequently, speaking with doctors, holding the thick medical file, answering on his father's behalf before anyone could blink. Elaine drifted in each afternoon with hot coffee and soft perfume, perched at the foot of the bed, eyes on her phone, then dropped comments like feathers meant to settle without notice. "Mom, don't worry, Daniel can handle everything." Or, "For now, just let him take care of it." Neat, quiet, final. Judith did not push back. In those early days, she was genuinely too drained to push back. She rose at 5 each morning, drove to the hospital, sat beside Walter's bed listening to the steady rhythm of the heart monitor. Then home. Laundry, phone calls from acquaintances, the growing pile of mail and bills on the kitchen table. By evening, a quick bowl of soup in front of news that never registered. Sleep on the sofa, with reading glasses still pressed against her face. It was during those grinding weeks that the documents started appearing. First, a temporary power of attorney so Daniel could manage the store accounts while Walter healed. Then, papers transferring check-signing authority. Then came the sheets Daniel placed before his mother. That calm voice, the tone of someone explaining something necessary to a child. Judith asked a few questions. Daniel answered just enough to stop the next one from forming. Or maybe she simply lacked the energy to press until the truth surfaced. Walter returned home at the beginning of November. He walked slowly, his left hand still weak, his mouth pulling slightly crooked when words came too fast. From that point forward, the store belonged almost entirely to Daniel. Walter sat in the living room armchair more than he sat in the small office behind the checkout counter. He watched the news, dozed, sometimes asked how the week's sales had gone. Daniel always answered, brief, firm, then drove off before dinner. And Judith began noticing small changes inside her own house. The shared checkbook vanished from the kitchen drawer. Her credit card was declined once at the supermarket. The system was being updated, they said. The sedan she had always driven to church, the library, the grocery store, Daniel gently suggested it stay in the garage, for safety. The weather was shifting, roads getting slippery, no longer suitable for an elderly person. Judith heard those words on a bitter evening in early winter. The whole family had gathered for dinner at Daniel's house. The dining table stretched long and dark, its wooden surface polished to such a shine that each plate clinked faintly against it when sat down. Elaine sat to the right, slicing her chicken into careful, even pieces. Daniel's daughter played in the next room, The muffled sound of a cartoon bleeding through the door until Heather pulled it shut. Daniel was the first to set down his fork. That small motion always carried weight. It meant something was coming. Mom. His gaze fixed straight ahead, though his tone stayed soft. I think it's time we started organizing things a little more sensibly. Judith glanced up from her mashed potatoes. Organizing what? The house? The finances? Looking after Dad? And you're traveling. Walter sat at the head of the table, hands resting in his lap, eyes fixed on his napkin. Judith waited for him to speak. He didn't. Daniel went on. Judith lowered her spoon. Elaine chimed in, her voice light, almost helpful. Quote 17 __. Judith turned toward her husband. Quote 18 __. He raised his head clumsily, like a student caught not paying attention. Quote 19 __. The sentence was short, nearly harmless, but the room grew colder around it. Daniel reached beneath his chair and pulled a stack of papers from the leather briefcase at his feet. Quote 20. Quote. It took Judith several seconds to absorb what he was really saying. Quote 21. Quote. Daniel didn't flinch. I want you somewhere more suitable. Heather appeared at that exact moment with a plate of bread, as though this were nothing more than an ordinary family meal. Elaine wouldn't meet her mother's eyes. Walter remained frozen in place, and Judith understood. All of this had been decided before she walked through the door. She was the only one who'd shown up late to the story of her own life. Quote 23 __, she asked. Daniel's answer came without pause. I've moved everything into a consolidated management account. Hospital bills, insurance, repairs, daily expenses. It all runs through there, fully transparent. And your car, let Elaine use it for now. She drives constantly for work. Judith sat motionless for a long time. The dining room clock let out a single dry tick. Beyond the window, the season's last leaves scraped across the stone yard in short, rustling waves. The old Missouri farm surfaced in her mind like a photograph left too long in the sun. A small house, an empty horse stable, the workshop her father had always kept locked, the smell of wood shavings and engine oil and old music, all of it tangled somewhere deep in her memory. Judith asked. Daniel blinked. Elaine quickly opened her handbag, dug around for a moment, then placed on the table a small keyring bound with a fraying strip of fabric. They had prepared even that. Judith picked it up. Quote 27 __. Nobody stopped her, perhaps because every person at that table believed this was surrender. The following morning, Judith opened the wardrobe and pulled out a dark blue suitcase, old and scuffed. She packed a few warm layers, her blood pressure medication, a notebook with a brown cover, her birth certificate, her marriage certificate, a handful of photographs. And the wool scarf her mother had knitted years ago. Everything else she left behind. By midday, Daniel drove her to the long-distance bus station in Springfield. He placed the suitcase on the sidewalk, checked his watch, and said, Quote 28 __. Judith nodded. She climbed aboard the bus just as a thin rain began to fall. The seats inside carried the smell of old plastic and stale coffee. She sat by the window with her handbag pressed against her lap, watching through condensation-streaked glass as Daniel turned his back before the bus even lurched forward. The road unwinding from the city seemed longer than she remembered. Strip malls gave way to gas stations, billboards fading at their edges, cracked parking lots. Then the buildings thinned, spread apart, vanished. By late afternoon, there was nothing beyond the glass but open land. Wooden fences leaning into wind, a few flat warehouse roofs, Clusters of bare trees standing motionless beneath a sky pressed low and gray as hammered tin. When the bus veered onto the narrow road leading to the last town before Missouri, Judith rested her temple against the cold window. She didn't sleep, she only shut her eyes, as though darkness could compress the miles left between her and wherever she was going. She reached Dawson close to noon the following day. The bus station was a concrete slab beside a convenience store advertising fishing bait, ice, and cigarettes on a hand-painted sign. The driver hauled her suitcase from the luggage hold, set it on the pavement, climbed back aboard. The door folded shut. The engine growled. The bus reversed from the curb and vanished around the bend, leaving nothing but diesel fumes hanging in air that smelled of frost. Judith stood motionless, adjusted her scarf, then dragged her suitcase through the store's front door. Behind the register sat a broad-shouldered woman, gray hair wound into a high bun, thumbing through a gardening magazine. Quote 29. The woman asked without looking up. Quote 30. Now the woman raised her eyes fully. Quote 31. Quote 32. Quote 33. The magazine closed slowly. The woman studied Judith's face, searching it, as if trying to match these features with a name no one in town had spoken for years. Take Route 14 straight out of town. Cross the little bridge. When you hit the fork with the blue mailbox, go left. Still close to 4 miles after that. Judith thanked her. She bought a bottle of water, 2 packs of salted crackers, and asked whether there was any place to rent a car or call a cab. The woman shook her head. Out here folks either drive themselves or ask somebody they know. Judith pulled her suitcase back into the open air. Wind swept the road flat, carrying dry grass and damp earth on its back. She had walked more than half a mile when a truck slowed behind her. An old red pickup eased alongside, engine ticking low. The driver was a man in his 60s, dark cloth cap, one hand resting loose on the wheel. Heading to the Porter farm? Judith stopped. That's right, get in. I'll take you most of the way. She looked at the empty truck bed, then at the man. At her age, caution still lived in her bones, but so did exhaustion. She opened the door, climbed into the passenger seat, wedged the suitcase between her feet. Sam Whitaker, the man said as the truck rolled forward. My place is just down the road from yours. Judith Mercer. He nodded once. I know the Porter name. Your father repaired violins, cellos, other instruments I couldn't properly name if you asked me. Back then, city cars would come down this road looking for him now and again. Judith turned toward him. I always thought my father just did odd jobs in that workshop. Sam's mouth curved faintly. Quote 43, the road narrowed as they drove. Surface crumbling in patches. Frozen pasture land on both sides. Wooden fences broken through in places. Past a low row of elm trees, the house appeared. It was smaller than Judith remembered, or perhaps a child's memory stretches everything larger than life allows. The roof sagged at its right corner. 3 porch steps leaned hard to one side. The old horse stable behind the house was missing several boards. The long, low workshop beside it stood silent, its wide door sealed shut, blue paint curling off in strips. Sam stopped the truck at the gate. Water and electricity have probably been cut a long time now, he said. If you're planning to stay, I can come back this afternoon. Help you take a look at things. Judith gripped the suitcase handle. I don't want to be a burden. It's no trouble. Around here, the difference between burdening someone and helping each other is just whether people are willing to open the door. He said it the way a man talks about weather. Simple, settled. Judith stepped out of the truck. Weeds brushed against the hems of her pants. The ring of keys Elaine had given her held 6 in total. The third one fit the front door, but the door jammed halfway, blocked by a thick carpet of dust on the floor beneath it. Inside, the air tasted of old wood, old fabric, and something sealed away far too long. Judith set down her suitcase and forced open every window that still moved on its hinges. Light flooded in. A small dining table, an old gas stove, two straight-back chairs. The high kitchen cabinets her mother could never reach without a step stool. She moved through each room. The living room held nothing but a couch draped in a white sheet gone yellow with age. The small bedroom, an iron bed, a thin mattress, a wardrobe with one crooked door. The bathroom had no mirror. The faucet gave nothing. Not a sound, not a drop. At the end of the hallway, the back door opened onto a waterlogged patch of grass and the path leading to the workshop. Judith stood staring at that workshop door for a long time. In her memory, Elias Porter had rarely let his daughter inside. He never forbade it harshly. He only said, "It's messy in here. Let Dad handle it." That was enough. A child understands. Some doors in a house open for work, not for curiosity. She turned back to what needed doing first. By 3 in the afternoon, she had wiped down the kitchen table, swept a pile of dry leaves and cobwebs onto the porch, forced 2 windows open, and found in a drawer a box of matches that still struck. She tried the stove. No flame. She tried the light switch. Nothing. She took 2 small sips from the water bottle she had bought in town, then lowered herself into the kitchen chair to rest her feet. Just before 4, the sound of a truck rolled into the yard again. Sam had brought 2 large water cans, a paper bag with bread, eggs, smoked sausage, a flashlight, and several candles. "Figured you probably hadn't had time to go back into town yet," he said. Judith stood. "I'll pay you." "Later is fine." He set everything on the table and looked around once. "House is still solid. Plumbing needs checking. The electrical breaker is probably locked outside at the pole. I know someone at the power company. I'll call them tomorrow." "And the water?" "There's a tank behind the house, but it hasn't been used in a long time. For now, use what I brought. If you need, I can take you over to my place to bathe one evening." Judith pressed her lips together slightly. She was not yet used to accepting help offered this directly. Sam seemed to see that. He said no more. Simply stepped out onto the porch, inspected a few rotten boards, then returned to the kitchen door. "The nights here are colder than you think. Back bedroom is less drafty than the front room. The door locks. I'll come back tomorrow morning." After he left, the yard fell silent again. Judith used water from the can to wash her face and hands, lit the candles, and fried 2 eggs in an old pan she found under the sink. Ate them with bread. Night fell faster than she expected. The house sank into pale yellow candlelight, every corner of every wall throwing long shadows. Before going to the bedroom, Judith took the brown-covered notebook from her suitcase, sat at the kitchen table, and wrote 3 lines. "Turn the electricity back on. Check the water. See what is still worth keeping in the workshop." She set down the pen, closed the notebook, picked up the flashlight, and walked down the hallway. When she passed the last window in the house, she stopped. Outside in the backyard, beneath a dark gray sky, the workshop door stood there, dark and still, as if it had never been waiting for anyone through all those years. The next morning, Judith woke before the sun had fully risen. Not because she had slept well, because the old house carried the kind of silence that made it impossible to lie still for long. Wind slipped through some gap in the roof, struck the window frame, and whistled softly, like someone sighing in the next room. She pulled on another sweater, went into the kitchen, and boiled water in the old kettle she had found in the cabinet. The water from Sam's can was still freezing cold. She made instant coffee in a chipped mug, ceramic, handle snapped clean off, and stood by the back door, drinking it slowly, watching the yard disappear into mist. In morning light, everything looked less destroyed than it had the night before. Weeds still choked every inch, the fence still sagged, the horse stable stood hollow, and the workshop remained sealed shut. But dawn gave her eyes something the darkness hadn't. She could trace the path, could see what was salvageable, what needed tearing out, would deserve to be left alone a while longer. Sam pulled up just past 7. Toolbox. A roll of electrical wire, 2 pastries folded in wax paper. Already called the power company, he said, stepping down from the truck. They'll come by late morning. Let me look at the water pipes first. They walked together around the back of the house. The metal rainwater tank was still whole, just needed scrubbing out. Several pipe sections along the exterior wall had cracked open. Sam crouched low, turned the shut-off valve, tapped a joint with his knuckle, then told Judith to hold the plastic bucket on the other side. 30 minutes later, the kitchen faucet coughed out a brown stream of water. Judith stood there watching it pour into the basin like it was proof. Proof she hadn't arrived too late. Proof something here still worked. By midday, electricity returned. Only part of the house responded. The hallway bulb was dead. The living room outlet sparked and flickered. But the kitchen light came on, steady, yellow, warm. Judith wiped her palms on the towel, tilted her face toward the glow, then turned to Sam. He was cutting an apple slice with a small folding knife. He smiled at that. After a simple lunch, toasted bread, sliced apples, Judith walked out to the workshop. The door was heavier than she'd expected. She tried key after key. The 5th one fit. A dry click. The door shifted inward, pulling a thin curtain of dust down onto the concrete floor. Inside, much darker than outside. Judith stood still, letting her eyes adjust. The first thing she recognized was the smell of old wood. Then machine oil, dried varnish, damp paper. And underneath all of it, something very faint, very familiar. Like velvet kept too long in a sealed box. The workshop stretched long and narrow before her. On the left, a workbench ran the full length of the wall, lined with countless small drawers. On the right, tall wooden shelves held instrument cases, tool chests, glass jars packed with tiny nails, paintbrush bristles, coiled strings. At the far end, a high window. Light came through only a single patch, just enough to show dust floating in the air like pale smoke. Judith moved toward the bench. On its surface, a wine-colored felt cloth still lay flat. 2 small pliers, a magnifying glass with a brass frame, and an open wooden box holding thin strips of wood, each cut with impossible evenness. Her father had sat here for hours. She could hear it now, the faint rasp of a file, the slide of a drawer, the dry cough he tried to swallow. There had been afternoons when her mother called him to dinner 3 times before he answered. Back then, Judith had believed he was simply lost in old things nobody cared about. In the 4th drawer from the left, a stack of hardbound notebooks tied together with cloth string, each one labeled by year: 1998, 1999, 2000. She pulled one free and opened it. This was no scattered note-taking. It was a work log. Dates, client names, instrument type, condition upon receipt, repairs needed, estimated cost, payment collected. Notes about the wood grain, the finish, the fractures, the serial number. Judith turned more pages. Names from St. Louis, Kansas City, even Chicago. A few entries mentioned regional orchestra, private collector, sent back after May concert. She set the notebook down and opened the chest near the foot of the bench. 3 violins inside, each wrapped in soft cloth. 1 viola with no strings remaining. And a small box containing certificates, handwritten letters, and payment invoices, all clipped carefully into separate bundles. A light knock at the workshop door. Sam stood there with his hat in his hands. "Didn't mean to spook you," he said. "Saw the door was open. Figured I'd check in." Judith held up a fistful of papers. "Did you know my father was doing all this? At this level?" Sam moved closer, peered over her shoulder. "All I ever knew was folks carried instrument cases in and carried them back out. Nobody discusses finances or paperwork in the produce aisle." Judith showed him a letter bearing the letterhead of a small theater in Columbia. Short, direct. A thank you to Mr. Elias Porter for restoring the cello used in their autumn performance, along with a proposal for continued collaboration, 2 more instruments early the following year. He never said a word to me, Judith said. Sam didn't respond right away. He lifted a small wooden box from the table, ran his thumb across the dust on its lid, then set it back down gently. Quote underscore 67 underscore. Judith kept searching until late afternoon. Inside a metal cabinet held shut by a latch, she uncovered more insurance documents, bank receipts, an envelope with 3 small keys inside, and a set of papers headed Porter Workshop Holdings. Beneath that, a copy of the land ownership certificate. Named under a trust. Sole beneficiary, Judith Porter Mercer. She read every line, slowly. Not left to Walter, not to both of them as a couple, not divided among the children. For her, only her. By the time the afternoon light started to fade, Judith had organized 3 separate stacks: work logs, customer correspondence, legal records. She carried them into the house, placed them in neat rows on the kitchen table, then pulled out the brown-covered notebook and wrote more. Call a lawyer in town. Find someone to appraise the instruments. Check the trust. Her pen was forming the last line when the landline telephone in the kitchen rang. The sound froze her in place. She had assumed that line was dead, had been dead for years. Judith lifted the receiver. Elaine. Quote 68 underscore. Her voice was coated in something softer than usual. Quote 69 underscore. Judith glanced at the stack of files spread across the table. Quote 70, quote 71, quote 72. A pause from Elaine. 1 beat too long. Quote 73. Judith turned her gaze toward the kitchen window. The sky was dimming. The backyard dissolved slowly into soft gray. Quote 74, she said. Quote 75. Monday morning, Judith drove Sam's old pickup into town. He left the keys on the kitchen table at dawn, along with a note scratched in pencil. Quote 76 underscore. She read it, folded it, slipped it into her coat pocket. She had never driven an automatic this old. The dashboard rattled with every gear shift, but the engine turned over, the heater still blew warm, and that was enough. Lawyer Martha Bell kept her office on the 2nd floor of a brick building near the post office. The brass nameplate hung slightly crooked. The wooden staircase groaned under Judith's weight. Inside, the waiting room barely fit a fabric couch, a magazine rack, and 1 plant drowning in too much water. Martha Bell was somewhere in her 50s. Short hair, thin-framed glasses. An ash-gray sweater that had seen many consultations. She went through every document Judith had brought, interrupted only twice. Once for an exact date, once to ask Judith to hold while she marked a passage in the file. Then Martha removed her glasses. Set her pen down flat. Do you understand what you're sitting on? Judith met her eyes. A pile of papers my father never bothered to explain. No, I mean legally. Martha slid the trust document forward across the desk. This land, the workshop, the house, every professional asset listed here, all of it belongs to a trust your father established 18 years ago. Sole beneficiary is you, not your husband, not marital property. No one can act on your behalf unless you sign a new document granting them that authority. Judith placed her hand on the edge of the desk. What if I signed a few papers in Illinois that may concern bank accounts or the house over there? But this property stands apart, completely apart. Martha opened the work log folder once more. And here is what truly matters. Your father did not restore instruments as a hobby. He maintained regular clients, income streams, trust transfer agreements for assets held in his care. Some obligations may have lapsed with time, but the professional value remains. How much, I cannot say yet. Martha straightened in her chair. You need a proper appraiser, not some fellow hawking old things at a weekend market. Someone who genuinely understands string instruments, restoration documentation, insurance records. I know a person in Colombia. I'll make the call. I don't need a large number. I just need to know whether I can stand on my own. Martha held her gaze a moment longer. Most people come to me asking how to avoid losing what they have. You're asking whether you have enough to live. Those are very different questions. I'm past the age of wanting more than what is necessary. Martha's mouth lifted, just barely, as though that answer pleased her. That afternoon, Judith walked into the town bank and opened an account under her own name. The first deposit was what remained in her wallet and a small check she had discovered in the workshop, still valid, issued by a community theater paying her father from the last year he was still working. The bank employee studied it carefully and said verification would take a few days. Judith stepped onto Main Street just as the church bell struck 3. She entered the diner on the corner and ordered chicken soup and hot tea. At the next table, 2 farmers argued about livestock feed prices. At another, 3 older women discussed the school and the weekend football game. No one paid attention to Judith for very long. The feeling was strange and pleasant. Here she was not Daniel Mercer's mother, not Walter Mercer's wife, just a woman eating lunch alone. When she returned to the farm, Sam was on the porch replacing a rotten board. Quote 87. Quote, he asked without looking up. Quote 88. Quote, Sam drove in the last nails, stood, and dusted off his hands. Quote 89. Quote, quote 90. Quote. Sam looked at Judith. Sam nodded. No further questions. The matter rested there. 3 days later, Andrew Cole came to the workshop himself. Thin, wearing a dark overcoat, carrying cloth gloves, a magnifying glass, a small camera, and a thick black notebook. He moved slowly from shelf to shelf, opened each instrument case, examined each label inside through the F-holes, photographed serial numbers, compared them against the papers Judith provided. For nearly the first 2 hours, he said very little, mostly short remarks. Underscore underscore, quote underscore 93 underscore underscore. It was not until the 6th viola that he set down the magnifying glass and turned to face her. Underscore underscore, quote underscore 94 underscore underscore. Andrew nodded. Underscore underscore, quote underscore 95 underscore underscore. He paused, choosing his words with care. Andrew placed the violin back into its case and closed the lid gently. Late that same afternoon, the landline in the kitchen rang again. This time it was Daniel. He asked immediately. No greeting, no pretense. Judith sat down in the chair and pulled the notebook closer. Judith lifted her pen and wrote a single line on the blank page. She spoke into the phone with deliberate slowness. 103. 3 days later, a summons arrived. The envelope had been tucked into the mailbox by the gate, buried between the electric bill, a livestock feed flyer, and the bank letter confirming her new account was active. Heavy paper, sharp corners. Her name printed in full. Exactly correct. Judith Porter Mercer. The sender was Sangamon County Court, Illinois. She carried it into the kitchen, set it on the table, used the tip of a letter opener to slice the edge the way she once opened overdue library fee notices back when she was still working. The contents were so brief they felt like ice. Daniel Mercer and Elaine Mercer had filed a petition requesting an evaluation of their mother's capacity to manage her finances. The grounds? She was living alone on a deteriorating property far from family, showing signs of making unusual decisions regarding assets and being under the influence of outsiders. Judith read it once, then again. No sentence directly said she was losing her mind. No word sounded crude. Everything was written in that clean, proper, polite language that would make anyone uninvolved believe this was a deeply responsible act by concerned children. She folded the paper, slid it back into the envelope, set it neatly on the table, called Martha Bell. "I'll come right away," the lawyer said. Martha arrived within 40 minutes, file case, tablet, and an expression that held not one grain of surprise. She read the petition in silence, turned each page, tapped her finger lightly against the table's edge. Quote 105, quote, she said. Quote 106, quote. Quote 107, quote. Quote 108, quote. Martha looked up. Judith turned toward the window. Sam was outside in the yard, bent over, measuring the fence section by the gate again. He was setting a new post with the calm of a man accustomed to working, before anyone else could find a reason not to. Quote 110, quote 111. Martha opened her file case. Quote 112, quote. That afternoon, Judith drove into Columbia for the appointment Martha had arranged. The testing lasted over an hour. Remember 3 words and repeat them later. Draw a clock face. Count backward. Explain why she had moved to Missouri. Describe how she had managed money since the beginning of the month. Name who was helping her, whom she had hired, what she had paid for. Judith answered everything. Not quickly, but cleanly. The doctor was a middle-aged black woman with a gentle voice and very alert eyes. When it was finished, she closed the file. Quote 113, quote 114, quote 115, quote 116, quote 117. The results went straight to Martha's office the following morning. While waiting, Judith gathered every paper into separate stacks. Electric bills, materials for the porch roof repair, gas receipts, the bank confirmation letter. Andrew Cole's preliminary appraisal. The trust documents. The deed of land use rights. The receipt for the water pipe repair. And the notebook, her own handwriting, recording every expense since the first day. Sam brought her a cardboard file box with a handle. Quote 118, quote, he said. Judith took it. Sam pulled out a chair and settled across from her. For the first time since she'd come to the farm, Judith asked him something personal. Have you been through something like this? Sam went quiet for a moment, long enough that Judith thought he might let the question dissolve into air. But then he spoke. My sister. Her husband died young. Her 2 children used the excuse that she signed papers quicker when they sat beside her. By the time she understood what had happened, the house was already in the younger boy's name. Couldn't sue. Not enough documentation. Not enough fight left in her. His gaze drifted toward the porch. Since then, I watch for these things. Judith said nothing more. Another person's story, told in the right measure, does not need the listener to feel silence just to appear compassionate. 2 days before the hearing, Elaine appeared. She drove a rented SUV, wore flat shoes instead of heels, a cream-colored knit coat, her hair gathered neatly at the nape of her neck. She stood on the porch for several seconds before knocking, as though unsure whether she should have come at all. Judith opened the door. Quote 131 __. Elaine followed her mother into the kitchen, eyes sweeping the house that was already different from what she had first pictured. The floor had been scrubbed clean, the curtains replaced. The kitchen table wore a pale blue checkered cloth. On the shelf sat a few small potted plants Sam had brought over and helped her plant. Elaine said. Judith poured tea into 2 cups. Neither reached for hers right away. Elaine gripped the handle with both hands. Elaine raised her eyes, meeting her mother's gaze directly for the first time since walking in. Are people influencing you? Yes, Judith said. My own children. Elaine bit her lip. Her eyes reddened fast. But this time, Judith did not believe these were tears deployed at a convenient moment. "I know you're angry. That is past." Judith set down her cup. "What I need now is not a graceful apology. I need the truth." Elaine sat motionless. Only after a long silence did she speak. "Daniel found out you opened a separate account. He called the bank in Illinois, asked about all transactions. They wouldn't give him anything. He decided you must have found something here, and then he started saying that if you were no longer fully capable, the family had to step in and manage things. I told him that was going too far. He said I was soft-hearted." Her voice shrank. "I still signed." Judith absorbed all of it. "On the day of the hearing, will you tell the truth?" Elaine stared at the table. "If I'm asked, I won't lie." "That is not enough." She looked up. "If you know something is wrong, you must say it yourself before anyone asks." Elaine nodded, slowly, deliberately. When she rose to leave, darkness had nearly settled. Judith walked her daughter to the porch. The wind blew colder than usual through the empty yard. Elaine stopped on the bottom step and turned back. "If all this passes, will you still want to see us?" Judith kept her hand on the doorframe. "Tomorrow, I'm heading up to Illinois," she said. "The rest can wait until after the hearing." The hearing began at 9 in the morning in a small courtroom behind the civil hallway of the Sangamon County Courthouse. Judith arrived 15 minutes early. She wore a dark gray knit dress, a wool coat buttoned high at the neck, and carried the cardboard file box Sam had given her. Martha Bell walked beside her, one arm clasping her briefcase, her steps measured, neither hurried nor slow. They did not speak much. At the courtroom door, Martha turned and asked one question. "Do you remember how you need to answer?" Judith nodded. Exactly what is asked. No more, no less. Daniel was already inside. He sat on the left side bench with his lawyer, dark blue tie, hair neatly combed, face tight but working to hold that familiar calm expression. Elaine sat one seat away from him. Walter had come too. He looked visibly older after only a few months, sitting upright but exhausted. Both hands pressed flat against his knees, like a man who no longer knew what to do with them. The judge was a woman in her 60s, voice precise and unhurried. She scanned the file briefly, then raised her eyes. "This is a petition requesting an evaluation of Mrs. Judith Mercer's financial management capacity and civil decision-making ability. The petitioning side may present first." Daniel's lawyer rose. His words came smooth, polished, deliberate. Underscore underscore, quote, underscore 162, underscore underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 163, underscore underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 164, underscore underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 165, underscore underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 166, underscore underscore. Judith sat listening, both hands resting on the file box in front of her. If someone had walked in without knowing the full story, they might have believed she was a woman slowly slipping from reality. When Martha's turn came, she did not rush to her feet. She opened her briefcase, removed 3 sets of documents already flagged and marked. Only then did she begin. "Your Honor, our response is straightforward. First, Mrs. Judith Mercer completed an independent medical evaluation 5 days ago. It confirmed full cognitive function, intact memory, planning capacity, and sound decision-making ability. She placed a copy on the clerk's desk. One judge turned toward Judith. Judith stood. Martha handed the file box to the court clerk. The judge turned several pages, reading the flagged sections quickly. She paused at the medical evaluation, then at the preliminary report from the appraisal expert. Underscore underscore, quote, underscore 182, and the man in the back row stood. Andrew stepped forward, was sworn in, and confirmed that he had personally inspected the Missouri property. He had compared ownership documents against professional records. His conclusion: Judith Mercer fully understood what she owned, what she was doing, and had chosen a careful, deliberate management approach. The opposing lawyer pressed several follow-up questions, trying to steer toward the idea that someone else was guiding her. Andrew answered without hesitation, quote, 183, quote. On the left bench, Daniel shifted in his seat. The judge turned to Elaine, quote, 184, quote. Elaine pressed both hands together. After a long moment, she stood. Her voice was quiet at first, but it did not tremble. She paused for a beat. The courtroom went still. Daniel's lawyer leaned slightly toward her, but Elaine did not sit down. I should have said that sooner, she continued. The judge closed the file. The court finds no basis to continue this petition. The medical record is clear. The asset management conduct is consistent. The source of the assets is lawful and has been fully explained. The petition is dismissed. The sound of the clerk's pen tapping the desk was barely audible. Daniel didn't glance toward his sister. Walter remained motionless, gaze locked on the tile beneath his feet. In the hallway, Martha took Judith's hand and pressed it. You performed better than nearly anyone I've ever stood beside in a room like that. Thank you. No. A thin smile crossed Martha's face. Thank your father. The man kept his records in impeccable shape. Andrew said his farewell and was the first to leave.